I'm Dick Samuels, and I direct the Center for International Studies, and I'm delighted to see so many of you here, and in particular delighted this afternoon to host the conversation you're going to have with Admiral William Fallon on issues of on global issues of national importance for the next administration. Admiral Fallon's career, a very distinguished career, is, I think, very well known to most of you. From March 2007 and for a year following until March of 2008, he led the U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, which is one of the 5 geographic joint military commands of the U.S. Armed Forces that are led by 4-star generals or admirals. During his tenure as CENTCOM commander, he was responsible for U.S. operations in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and directed all U.S. military activities in the Middle East, in Central Asia, and in the Horn of Africa. Prior to going to CENTCOM, he served as commander of the U.S. Pacific Command with responsibility for U.S. military operations in the Asia-Pacific region, and previously served as commander of the U.S. Fleet Forces Command, the U.S. Atlantic Fleet, and was the 31st Vice Chief of Naval Operations. Upon retiring from a distinguished career for 41 years, Admiral Fallon joined the MIT Center for International Studies, where he is now as the Robert Wilhelm Fellow, and we're delighted to have him share his thoughts with you this afternoon. Bill.
Well, Dick, thank you very much. We're going to try something. Does that work? Okay. Use the other mic. Well, I'm grateful to have this nice turnout, particularly given the weather and given your choice of speakers just down the road. What I thought I'd do is try to live up to the promise here in terms of talk and make this really a conversation. I have no intention to lecture, so if anybody's going to take notes for a quiz, you can rest easy and put those pencils down. What I thought I would do is talk to you a little bit about myself and background. Dick was kind enough to tell you what I've been doing the last few years, but I've actually spent quite a bit of time in uniform, about 45 to be almost exact. And I ought to tell you that my naval career didn't start out very auspiciously. And just to give you a little bit of background, in 1962, I was a high school student and was informed that I had actually passed and done pretty well by some accounts in a national test. In those days, the Navy had a unique scholarship program that they offered around the country at some select schools, including this one. And so I was invited to come down for some additional testing to see if my body was functioning correctly and to be on the receiving end of a, quote, interview. And so I went down to Philadelphia, and I got in a long line of about 30 folks there from around the Northeast. And we proceeded in this line and noticed people would disappear into one of 3 doors down at the end of the hall. And as they returned, 2/3 of them seemed to be in pretty good spirits, and then the other third decidedly dejected. And so we asked them for the gouge, as we say in the Navy, what's going on down there. And the word came back that of the 3 doors, there were 2 young lieutenants inside, and they were just great guys. And then there was this really crusty old salt Navy captain, probably about 42, 43 years old in truth. And he was really bad news, and you really wanted to make sure you avoided that door. So as my time came, I could see how this is going to work out. And sure enough, I went inside the 3rd door. And by way of background, I should tell you that it turns out that the captain behind the door was a submarine officer, a nuclear power person trained by Admiral Rickover. And those that are too young to know, Admiral Rickover was quite a figure, both in and outside the Navy. And within the Navy, he was most famous for his interviews, in which he conducted, we thought, with the express purpose of trying to make the interviewee feel as uncomfortable as humanly possible, and to leave with the impression that you were completely insignificant in the presence of the august admiral. And so this captain had taken his cue from his experiences, and as I walked in, I found him head down, buried in some papers, and I stood there, and he never moved, never made a sound. And so I wasn't in the military. I didn't know how to deal with this, didn't come from a military family, and so I kind of stood there, and then I thought maybe he expects me to stand at attention, so I made some effort to pull my shoulders back and stand up, and whereupon he looked up and said, "What are you doing here?" And it kind of went downhill from there. And so he accused me of being masquerading as a scholar, masquerading as somebody that really had an interest in the Navy, claimed I probably knew nothing about the naval service, and then challenged me to say something about the Navy. And so trying to think pretty rapidly without shifting too many times on my feet, I said, well, I can tell you that the Navy is getting into nuclear power. And he said, is that right? He said, well, can you name me 5 nuclear-powered ships? And fortunately, I could. And so after he gave a harumph to that one, I felt pretty good. And then being young and pretty stupid, I decided to tread out on the thin ice a little further, and I said, I know a little bit more about the Navy, too. And he said, oh, tell me, Mr. Fallon. And I said, well, I know that the father of the Navy is buried right down the street here in Philadelphia. And he said, is that so, Mr. Fallon? He seemed to take great interest in this and kind of started to rise out of his chair, and he said, and who might that father be? And I said, well, of course, it's John Barry. Whereupon he leapt out of his chair, came across the desk, put his nose about 1 inch from mine, and said, who? Don't you know? Have you never heard of John Paul Jones? He's the father of the Navy. And I went, uh-oh, what do I do now, Coach? So I said, well, I think he's testing me. And so I said, but I know that the father of the Navy is John Barry, sir, because I've seen his tombstone down in Old St. Mary's Cemetery, 2nd and Arch, and it says right there, John Barry, father of the U.S. Navy. Whereupon he exploded and railed and ranted and accused me of all kinds of things. And I said, well, I guess this was going to be a short-lived career. And at the end, he then introduced himself as the professor of naval science at a place called Villanova, and up the road a piece, and invited me to stop in again for an interview at some later date. But I should give you a little P.S. here. To the best of my knowledge, through its history, the Navy has tried to keep ships by the name of John Paul Jones and John Barry in commission because they know that their bread has been buttered on both sides. John Paul Jones, very famously known as the father. His bones rest down at the Naval Academy in the crypt under the chapel. John Barry, in fact, was the financial father of the Navy and is paid great homage. And so he fittingly has his tombstone marked, as I pointed out. I didn't think I was going to make it through that day, though. But I did raise my right hand a little bit some months later, 1963, and began what I expected to be rather short service to the nation. I thought it was a pretty good deal at the time. Got a very nice scholarship at an institution that was going to broaden me, and had an opportunity to do some very exciting things in the world. And yeah, I was really excited. Didn't know much about the Navy, had read a lot and so forth, but I really did think that I'd do my time. I think it was 5 years, and then get out and probably be a college professor. So aren't you all lucky? And those that have gone in between then and now to not have to put up with that. I spent most of my career in naval aviation, and so I got a chance to see the splendor of the skies and the stars and all manner of things that I only dreamed about when I was a youngster. I've had the pleasure of being to every continent, been to the North Pole and the South Pole, and just about every place in between. I spent about 25 years experiencing the adrenaline rush and the occasional heart-stopping terror of flying on and off aircraft carriers. And for those who have never had that experience, I highly recommend it as something to keep you honest and remind you that we're all too frail in humanity here, and in any second you could be in deep trouble. But it was absolutely thrilling and wouldn't trade it for anything. Managed to outlive the Cold War and experienced, however, the ugliness and sorrow of lots of other wars. Vietnam, Lebanon, Kuwait, Balkans, Gulf War, Iraq and Afghanistan, and the last couple of wars. I laughed literally until my face ached at some of the antics and stunts that my colleagues and shipmates, and occasionally myself as a participant, pulled off. I could probably spend a month or two with anecdotes of things that occurred here and there. Maybe I'll give you one just to give you a sense of how things were back in the late 1960s in Vietnam. It was interesting in those days. We were flying up over the north, over North Vietnam that is, and pretty challenging. Probably not as challenging, we thought, as those grunts running around on the ground. But at any rate, one day a friend of mine who went by the call sign of Pee-wee, because his last name is Reese, and in the Navy, particularly naval aviation, the first thing that happens to you when you join is that you are assigned a nickname, or a call sign, as we say. And you don't get to pick this. Someone else affixes the moniker to you for reasons that some might choose to explain, most will not. But Pee-wee was pretty easy because there was a famous Brooklyn infielder by that name. And so Pee-wee was quite a character. And he was rather bold. He had a great big mustache and went around telling people how important he was. And one day he had the unfortunate occurrence to be shot down. And he was shot down over the Laotian North Vietnamese border in a place that was particularly nasty. Now the good news for him was that it happened just at dusk. And so he floated down in his parachute and wasn't able to be seen right away. And he was able to get a radio out and tell people that he was on the ground and alive. So as dusk turned into dark, it was pitch black because it was heavily jungled in this area and very mountainous. But Pee-wee was always the inquisitive sort, and so he decided that since he was told to just hunker down and wait till dawn when the rescue forces would come, that he could do a little exploring. And so he started to stumble around through the night, and he was very intrigued because he heard voices and he saw lots of little lights and things. And the place where he went down happened to be at a junction of what was known in those days as the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and it was a very busy highway from North Vietnam to South Vietnam, in which lots of trucks and tanks and thousands of people were traversing. And so anyway, Pee-wee was stumbling through the dark when all of a sudden he tripped on something and let out an exclamation. He hurt his leg and he reached down and went to move the offending branch, but the branch turned out to be rubber. And he felt this and said, I think I recognize this feel. And he pulled out his little flashlight and looked down. It was an electric cable. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And then he heard some voices pretty nearby, and he discovered that, in fact, this was a power cable going to a radar site, which we didn't have ever confirmed by intelligence, but the aviators thought it had been there forever. Anyway, let me fast forward a little bit. He decided that he ought to just hunker down and not go around. And so just before dawn, as directed, he came up on his radio and announced that he was still alive. And he was told to stand by, and if he could, to get himself in the deepest place he could find, because things were about to get rather warm. And so as the sun came up, an armada of our aircraft came and laid down a protective blanket of fire. And Pee-wee described it later as he was lying on the ground, and as each bomb went off around him, he would bounce about 3 feet in the air and try to cover his head and bounce again. And then he heard that great sound of a helicopter coming in to pick him up, and he quick ran out and popped his smoke, and then for his trouble received about 1,000 rounds of incoming rifle fire because he'd given himself away, of course, to the enemy. But somehow he was rescued, and he came back and made a grand appearance back on the aircraft carrier to the cheering throng. And of course, in violation of every regulation, he stepped off the helicopter with a cigar in his mouth, 2 bottles of whiskey, 1 in each hand, one for the guy that had packed his parachute and the other for his shipmates that he wanted to share with. But at any rate, lots of stories, lots of fun, lots of sadness too. Lost a lot of friends and many people for whom I was responsible during all those years. But I'll tell you that I'm very proud to have served alongside men and women in uniform for these years, and many civilians in our country who have supported the activities which our people have undertaken. And I'm going to divert here for a little, just a comment. And that is that today, as we sit here, there's still on the order of 200,000 of our service personnel serving in Iraq and Afghanistan and in many other places around the world. They're doing this for us, for themselves, for their families, for everybody in this country, and they're doing a lot of things that are really helpful to the world. And as I stay now away from, or I'm out of that business and get a chance to mix in other circles, I wonder what we really think about that in terms of what are they doing, why are they doing it, and how long do you think we can continue to get men and women to step up and do that kind of service for our country? The idea that we can outsource what they're doing to some people unknown is, I think, way off the mark. And something that we as a nation, as a people, need to think about. Because there are some tasks that have to get done. There are some things in this world and some people that are not here to help us, to support the principles and ideals upon which our country exists and functions. And there are many, many tasks out there that need doing. And it's something in terms of service that, whether it's in uniform, out of uniform, but doing something, each of us for the country, I think is really important, and I'll circle back to that. I've had a lot of other interesting experiences. I've got a chance to drink kava in the South Pacific and rub noses with the natives, enjoy some sacrificial goats and tender baby camel as a delicacy of the dinner table. Done some horseback riding and archery and drinking bouts, all in the service of our country. And, of course, had a chance to meet presidents and kings and emirs and defense ministers and prime ministers and, most importantly, many ordinary folks. So I'm an old guy, been around, done a lot of things. But that was yesterday. And what matters is today and tomorrow. So what I'd like to do is spend a few minutes talking about tomorrow and to share my perspective on some of these events. So next week, Americans are going to have an opportunity to go to vote for a new president and a vice president. And to say that the new president and his team will face daunting tasks is certainly an understatement. So what I thought I'd do today is outline a bit of the situation, the terrain as I see it, highlight a couple of tasks that I think loom large in the future, and then maybe offer a few suggestions, and most importantly, get to field your questions and talk about the things that you'd like to discuss. Well, at the risk of stating the obvious, certainly the world today is interconnected and highly interdependent, and the ripple of things that occur and events spreads rapidly, just like a pebble in the water around the world. And there's virtually nothing that goes on in any country of any size that doesn't have an effect somewhere else. Last week I was in China, and fascinating, hadn't been back in a couple of years. And so I was in Shanghai, and just explosive growth, all kinds of things going on. And people were concerned. And I took note of the fact that although there's certainly a lot of activity and many shipping containers still headed towards the port, the fact is that worldwide shipping demand for the conveyances, the container ships, is down about 50%. And the big concern in China right now is the closing of factories and the folks that are now out of work from these organizations that were going boom in a 10% a year expanding economy that now are facing a dramatic slowdown in the rest of the world. And so the government of China are rapidly trying to figure out how they're going to deal with this. And the immediate prescription they had, their bailout, if you would, their financial response was to try to find financial resources to provide for now all these folks that are finding themselves out of work. And I think their biggest task, as a little diversion here, is to now figure out a way to adjust their economy from one which fed an export market to one that's going to try to generate internal markets, which they think they need, and I would agree, pretty quickly. This financial crisis is certainly worldwide, and there should be little doubt that the slowdown will continue to evolve and lead to a rather large recession in most countries. The good news from my perspective is that leaders are taking it seriously, and they're acting pretty quickly and generally working together to try to mitigate the impact of and the effects of what's going on, and to take the essential actions to preclude complete collapse of the financial markets and a global depression. And I think that can be averted. And as you know, from the reaction of the markets, people are anxiously watching. But for those that may have missed it today, the Dow and other U.S. indices decided to follow the Asian and European leads, and the Dow was up a record amount, I think 900 points or so today, almost 10%. So might be good for those that are worried about your 401s. These are not minor events, and they're going to have very lasting effect. This is not going to be over tomorrow or next week or next month. We're going to feel this one for quite a while. So what should you be thinking, and what should we be doing? And I would tell you that from my perspective, I believe that Americans should recognize and change. We'll get to some of that. Recognize that the role our behaviors have had and continue to play in this current economic, political, and moral mess that we happen to find ourselves in. Now, of course, history is a series of sine waves of various amplitude, and we're certainly in one that's been going downhill for a while. To be sure, there are no lack of villains around the world. There are terrorists, there are tyrants and tin-horn dictators, as I guess there probably always have been. There's poverty, ignorance, arrogance, and absence of rule of law. But I think we need to start right here at home. Back in the 1950s, a fellow by the name of Meredith Willson wrote a musical. It's called The Music Man. Some of you may be of an age to remember that. And the signature song by the con man, Professor Harold Hill, in those days went something like this. You got trouble, my friend, right here. I say trouble, right here in River City, on the Charles. Right here in River City. That's trouble with a capital T, and it sounds like P, and it stands for pool, and it can go on and on. Well, in the play, Professor Hill, being a good con man, was trying to convince the locals that their trouble centered on a new pool hall that was about to open, and his solution to that potential problem for the young people was to form a band. And of course, he happened to have the market on band instruments and a few other things. But in a serious lane, I think the people of this country have been enjoying a good life with other people's money. And this has become a pretty ingrained habit, and maybe exceeding the adoration of the Red Sox around here in this town. I'm beginning to gauge this, although I guess being a Phillies fan, I better shut up. We've been living on foreign credits, and there's a literal mountain of U.S. IOUs that are sitting in foreign cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Tokyo, and to name just the most visible holders of U.S. debt. Does this matter? You betcha it matters. Look at the disastrous effects just in this country alone of the easy credit markets and what's happened when banks, these same banks, that is, those that are still in business, that made these loans start demanding payment. Talk about the kettle calling the pot black. The credit markets right now, as I think people are beginning to realize, are in rigor mortis. Why? Because nobody trusts anybody. Because everybody is suspicious of what the other guy was doing in this market. And it's pretty apparent if you're out in the business world. Governments, of course, have not been immune to the same kind of behavior and these fundamental market conditions. And I think they've mirrored, in many ways, the actions of individuals here. I'll give you a little anecdote. Back in Washington a couple months ago, there was a big story that ran in the Washington Post about the spiraling mortgage problems in the region. And one of the bigger individual lenders in town was lamenting the fact that they were just losing their shirts, and then admitted, in a surprisingly candid moment, that he had signed off on a loan to a gentleman who was employed at a fast food restaurant making under $35,000 a year, and he gave him a $500,000 mortgage. And then he was surprised when the guy defaulted on it. So it's individual actions that I think he can trace back to many of these things. And I think as we talk about mirroring behaviors, we might be wise to, before we get too carried away looking for problems in other places, either offshore in other countries or with political leaders or anybody else, that we might just hold this reflecting glass up to ourselves and take a look at what our individual behaviors have been. For example, what is it that's wrong with an educational system in this country that sparkles with institutions like MIT and the galaxy of world-class universities in the vicinity, but wallows in underperformance at the primary and intermediate levels, releasing millions, literally, of alleged graduates who can neither read nor write, understand mathematics beyond elementary levels, find any place on a map, and speak an unintelligible babble of some kind of syntax. I think this mediocrity, in my opinion, continuing to coast downhill despite huge infusions of cash by many school boards, is a tremendous burden not only on our productivity as a nation, our competitive advantage, and our social cohesion, but it's frankly a disgrace. As the world's most conspicuous consuming country, we have no near competitor in the world in our demand for energy sources. And of course, most of those energy sources are used to fuel automobiles, which get you know how many miles to the gallon in general. And of course, all this results in the largest contribution in the world to greenhouse gases. While feeding our self-indulgence in these personal material goods, we starve the critical infrastructure which enables our daily activities, and which is eroding and crumbling. Just take a walk around, travel the bridges, look at them, here and in most other cities, for lack of a disciplined, systematic investment in upkeep and maintenance. So the obvious question is, what are our priorities? So the new president is going to inherit certainly these domestic challenges. In the international scene, what he's going to get is, first of all, a very deep skepticism of American leadership, intentions, and methods. People the world over have really soured on the assertive, in-your-face brand of engagement that is perceived as a, in my jargon of naval aviation, join up and shut up mentality. And I have to explain what this is. When you're flying, and typically we fly with a wingman, you never go alone somewhere. The younger, less experienced pilot is told to join up, that is, fly up alongside, and shut up, and just listen, watch, and do what the leader does. And that works very well for young and experienced aviators, and it's a great way to learn. But it hasn't worked very well with the rest of the world, which perceives that we, as a nation, neither value nor desire any opinions other than our own. In a world of challenge and opportunity that has benefited immensely, lest there be any doubt, from American leadership, initiative, and generosity, critics, and there's certainly enough of them, view us as increasingly self-centered, self-indulgent, and, again, heedless of the interests and opinions of others. Now, to be fair, I think that some of this criticism reflects the exact same kind of behavior that's being decried. I think that this growing disenchantment with our policy is going to be something that's going to give the President a major challenge for the future. In my opinion, the most significant factor in the loss of confidence in U.S. leadership has been an indirect result of the terrorist attack of September 2001. We displayed, in the wake of that attack, an understandable instinct to bolster security, certainly because of the unprecedented and deadly nature of that attack and the urgency of countering what became pretty obviously was a worldwide al-Qaeda network. However, our response included methods and actions which have been not well received by many around the world. In any event, we're still going to have to deal with this terrorist threat, and one that could easily become more challenging with the potential proliferation of nuclear weapons technology in the hands of states which threaten regional and world stability. Dealing with the DPRK, North Korea, and Iranian nuclear aspirations, and the potential of both of these states to export instability has got to be pretty high on the foreign policy list. Certainly the ongoing conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan with huge investments in U.S. military personnel and as we would say, burn rate of about $3 billion a week are top of the list of unfinished business. With the majority of combat operations in Iraq completed and the Iraqi government and security forces demonstrating increased capability and confidence, the key task at hand is to turn over remaining responsibilities to the Iraqis at a pace that's going to continue stability while withdrawing the majority of U.S. forces. As I outlined in a recent op-ed piece, the long-term security arrangement currently being discussed between Iraq and the U.S. is very important, not just for determining the future stability of that country, but the pace of the turnover. Our progress in concluding the agreement is being closely observed by governments in the region. And in the spin-off, I think that it's also a very important background to potential future negotiations with Iran. Clearly, much work remains to be done in Afghanistan to stabilize the the security situation there and to provide, in concert with international partners, the kind of governance and opportunity that's going to help the people of that land. To sum up, the issues that I believe are facing the new president, the big ones, the financial crisis, which I expect will have continuing worldwide repercussions, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and long-term security in the Middle East, greater Middle East, the global competition for energy sources, and the damage that fossil fuels are causing to the environment, and the recognition or lack thereof of those realities, our relationships with other nations, particularly China, Russia, and our long-term allies in Europe and Asia, and a terror threat that could become more ominous with the potential acquisition of nuclear weapons by terrorists. And as an aside, the proliferation of this technology is real, and it's something that has got to be figured out and addressed by the international community. Now, solving these problems is going to be challenging, and it's going to require very close cooperation with other nations in the world. Diplomacy and cooperative engagement must be energized to reestablish the trust and confidence that others in the world have historically had in our country. But I believe the President will have to clearly signal that we not only care about what others think and do, but that we'll get our own domestic house in order. This is an essential prerequisite to reestablishing U.S. prestige and influence for the betterment of a very, very interdependent world. Furthermore, I think we need to understand that you just can't delegate this to the President or to other leaders anywhere. We've got to come at the challenges from both the bottom as well as the top. And each of us, I believe, has to acknowledge a responsibility to get engaged in the process by addressing individual behaviors that have contributed to this general malaise. None of this is beyond our capability. We're the most blessed of nations. The world still looks to us for leadership and initiative. We have the human capital, traditional values, and certainly the immense resources to take on and fix any of these challenges. What remains is just the willingness to do the job. Let's get going. With good leadership and the commitment of ordinary Americans, we can and we must get it done. Okay, I think I'd like to end there and turn it over to questions, and I'll go wherever you'd like to go. Okay, who'd like to start?
Entire federal budget. One is the current economic and fiscal or financial crisis, but the second is the longer-term issue of all of the debt that the United States federal government is accruing and how much of that is owned by foreigners. I wonder if you'd comment on what you think is the future of the federal budget, and in particular defense as part of that.
If I could, before I answer directly, make another comment that this activity of our government is reflective of individual behaviors by and large in the country. So, you know, chicken or egg, I don't know, you pick them, but we're doing the same thing generally at an individual level as we're doing as a government. We're just putting on the blinders and we're just spending like there's no tomorrow, or nothing to worry about tomorrow, I guess, to be more accurate. I don't know how you can sustain, if there are going to be long-term financial repercussions here, and there are. I mean, we're going to have these Yahoo days like today where everybody's going to say, yes, you know, I just gained back 2 or 3% of the 38 or so percent I just lost in the last couple months. But I expect that there's going to be continued pressure on the budget. And the defense budget's been growing for the last 8 years. And to expect that it's going to continue to grow, I think, is not an appropriate view of things. And so it's going to have to result in some major behavioral changes. But again, go back to some of the realities. We're spending a phenomenal amount of money just on operations in the Middle East today. And as our troop withdrawal continues and those operations wind down, there's a substantial amount of operations money that should not need to be spent, and there ought to be some opportunity there. But I think there's going to be a lot of pressure because I believe that the budgets are going to be severely constrained, certainly in the near term. We got this is an incredible amount of debt out there at every level. And, of course, the confidence that, or lack thereof, that goes with it, Cindy, is really a big deal. Sir?
Admiral, in the September 8th Oil and Gas Journal, it details how the Chinese government signed off with the Iraqi government on securing the rights to an oil field of roughly a billion barrels of oil.
Yeah.
And they're be paying the Iraqi government roughly $75 billion for that oil at a minimum. And it would seem to me that if we owe the Chinese money, that maybe they can see it their way. Since we've occupied and secured Iraq for the betterment of anybody who can sign an agreement with the Iraqi government, then maybe they can send some of that money to us. It's particularly interesting in view of the fact that we've also secured concession in Afghanistan for one of the largest copper mines, the copper deposits in the planet. Well, when they get done ramping up with that, maybe they can send us a check for that too. It's not going to be done strictly by bottom up and top down. It's going to come from sideways to some of the people that are benefiting from our trade or need worse from our blood.
My first response would be fat chance, and not trying to be snide, but not likely to happen. Chinese are out. They're trying to capture energy sources, and the deal in Iraq is to try to give them a toehold into being able to tap into what I think is a pretty vast potential that has yet to be really understood or appreciated inside Iraq. I think there's a lot more there than some people might think. And also the current inefficiency of the Iraqi oil production is so bad that doing almost anything will improve the world supply. In Afghanistan, they are certainly after the minerals, and that's one of the potential ways that country can get back on its own feet. It doesn't have a whole lot of recognized resources, but minerals are one of the things that they have in abundance. And there's been virtually no development of those, and so it's good I think it's, let me take an optimistic view here. It's good that the Chinese are willing to go invest in Iraq and Afghanistan. Of course, they have self-interest as a motivation, but again, let's put the mirrors up and see what we really have here. I think that in terms of who's paid for what, we've paid a huge sum for the conduct of these military operations. Today in Iraq, the Iraqi government is paying the vast majority of their cost for their military, and they're paying an increasing share of the development cost too, and I think that'll turn around. I think we've got a significant sunk cost. The best we're going to do is to, as we draw down our forces and hopefully continue the stability there, that we'll be able to just not be spending that amount of money. But I don't look for any rebates. Countries, however, I think that there are all kinds of repercussions, and not everything's bad. With this collapse of oil prices, that's a boon to certainly the consumers. It's going to be a real problem for some of the petro kings that have been strutting around and thinking that they're in pretty tall cotton. Those roles are going to be reversed in a few obvious countries. And I think that one of the future realities of life is that countries are going to have to pay more attention if they will recognize how much we're in this together, that we need to play supporting and collaborative and complementary roles in whatever we do. So great idea. I wouldn't look for any rebate checks anytime soon, sir.
Admiral, what's your view on the influence of our moves in Eastern Europe to do things like expand membership in NATO and install missile defenses in Poland, and how and the extent to which those kind of moves influence Russia's behavior of recent versus their own internal motivations, and if there should be any change in that posture of ours, what should it be?
I think you've highlighted the obvious, that there's a connection between all these things.
Well, I assume that, but I just wanted to...
Yeah, well, here's what I think. As we look at the world, we have this long list of things that we might recognize that we'd like to do. And at some point in time, you prioritize tasks. And you may change those priorities, but in this case, we have a situation in which you've got a country that was our adversary during the Cold War, that at the end of that war, when that empire collapsed, we had an opportunity, I think, to try to reset things and come up with a world that was much more cooperative than we find today. And I think for a lot of reasons, we didn't pay a lot of attention to it in the 90s. We either assumed it or we got diverted into other activities, and we just kind of let this thing bounce. It's like a pebble. One of my service dictums was, nothing runs on automatic, certainly for very long, and I think we just let this one run. So now what do we do, Coach? And I think without trying to tell you directly we ought to do this because of that, I think generally we'll have to take a look at the situation and decide what our priority is going to be. Is it more important to try to get Russia back on board as a helpful, if not ally, cooperative partner in some of these things? Or do we prioritize the potential threat of Iranian missiles coming into Europe as a higher threat? And I think this is certainly the kind of calculus that I would expect whatever the new administration is going to be ought to sit down and take a look at. And it would seem to me that as you rack and stack this stuff, you look at the things that are most important to you and the things that could really hurt you, and then the things that might hurt you, and you make what ought to be maybe not easy choices, but ones that seem like they're appropriate. Sir.
Admiral, I know that military law and tradition dictates that military officers, especially senior officers, don't criticize the president on policy. It seems to me like there's currently a dispute over whether retired military officers should show that same discretion. Now, do you think it's appropriate, or maybe even that there's an imperative for retired military officers to question policy?
I think I would first of all say be careful exactly how you define criticizing or whatever and the term policy, and what is policy and what's just story. I feel very strongly that recently retired military people should not be up there acting in a political way unless they make it very clear that they are now have exchanged suits and they're in a political mode. And there are some that have done that very clearly. They have established themselves as politicians or declared that they're going to act and speak as politicians, and that's fine. I think that retired military people need to be careful, because the influence that we may still have on our younger and junior people, they watch very closely what goes on. People are pretty astute these days, and they're looking for things that people say and do. And what I think is really important for those that are serving today is that they not start wondering what they ought to be doing in terms of political thoughts and actions. They ought to be focused on the tasks that they have and to attempt to be as apolitical as possible. Now, does that mean that retired people just fade away and don't do anything or say anything? Not at all. I think we should be, to the extent that people are interested in doing that, engaged in the political discussion, in the discourse. I'm doing some of that here at this institute, and to certainly express views But to be in the finger-pointing, name-calling business, I think, is absolutely inappropriate. And it's frankly a tough road to walk. We've had this discussion, I can tell you, among colleagues, to what extent people ought to be out there and what things they say. I think some people are over the line, and others do it in a pretty appropriate way. And so it's something that people have got to be very careful of. Of course, there's help of the wrong kind in this. Political folks trying to get people to stand up and be a political lightning rod one way or the other so they can attempt to embarrass the other party. And that's something that when you get to the root of problems in this country, one of the problems we've got to deal with is this polarization, which is continually fueled by, if he says that, then obviously we have to say something else. And if this policy goes in this direction, then far be it from us to even acknowledge that it exists. We've got to go somewhere else. And so that it's easy, I think, if you're not being careful to get drawn into these kinds of political games. Try in the back.
Thank you for your talk, sir. You've talked a lot about sort of tough choices and our failure to make them.
Yep.
And it seems like America has a lot of strategic commitments in the world. Seems like you've run most of them. When you sort of sit back and think about, where America might be going in the next 10 years or so, what kind of tough choices do you think that America might have to make in terms of giving up commitments, both in terms of sort of the fiscal costs of these kind of things and sort of the political capital that goes into maintaining a lot of our commitments abroad?
I'd be less interested in talking about things we give up and come at it from a different direction. Clean up our own house. We can have tremendous influence. We do have tremendous influence. We could have umpteen times more if we were as credible as we may think we are. And we've lost a lot of credibility. And a lot of it isn't just, as some would say, well, it's the actions of the president or the actions of the administration. Nonsense. You get far more basic than that. It's individual behaviors in this country and how they're reflected in the way we end up doing things and the demands we put on the world. We got a lot of resources. We don't spend a whole lot in things that I think would be very, very helpful to us in engagement. One of the things that as a geographic commander I decried was the limited amount of money that I had to actually do engagement with other countries. And when I was out in the Pacific, it's interesting how perspectives, of course, change when you have to change seats. But out there, I used to go back to Washington regularly and take out my sheet of paper and show them that the overwhelming percentage, like about 3/4 of all the foreign assistance money that this country spends, got dumped in the Middle East. And what about the vast Asia Pacific? 60% of the world's population, all these countries, all these opportunities, what the heck over? And then when I got back to Central Command and got to look at what the money was going for, I had a little bit different view. But in that I saw the benefits that we get in the money we spend. However, the money we do spend there is just a fraction of what I think we ought to be investing. And I think we're very capable of it. We'd have to probably feed ourselves a little bit less here and not in food. We could have plenty of that. But in things and material things and other benefits that we enjoy and seem to ask for more, I mean, we just can't seem to say no. We just want more of everything. And the politicians pander to that generally. And it's unfortunate. And you occasionally have somebody that will stand up and say, okay, we're just not going to do that. And then, knees get weak or whatever, and off we go again. So, what should we stop doing? Some of the things that are detrimental here, and we're not overcommitted. There's a lot of things we can do. We have an undercommitment of the right kind of resources, people out there. How many people do you have that are really engaged in these things in other countries? The answer is just a handful. One of the criticisms of the Department of State in the last several years has been they can't seem to muster anybody to go to Iraq or Afghanistan. That's right, and they can't muster people to go many other places because the whole thing was designed to just have a diplomatic representation in a number of countries. And you can total the countries, and it doesn't take a whole lot of people if all you're doing is diplomatic representation. But we're doing a lot more than that. Now, there are different ways to do this. We could do it with government people. I think we could probably get it done more effectively and more efficiently certainly with government guidance and coordination, but the private sector can do amazing things. I was astounded, just as a personal aside, to find out how many ordinary citizens are actually engaged in other countries in the world doing things that would water your eyes in trying to help other people. But it's not very well coordinated, and frankly, there are too few of them for the many challenges. But we could be doing a lot more now. It's easy to have meetings, but it's difficult to get people to actually agree to do things. And one of the things that the U.S. has done, I think particularly well over the years, has been to exercise that leadership and to push people and prod people and to convince them that the right thing to do is to step up and take the initiative to do things. And that's what we need to be doing more of. And to be able to do it effectively, we've got to be credible. And to be credible, we've got to kind of clean up our own house. Right behind you, I think. Oh, there was one.
Two areas for the next administration I'm interested in your comments on. First, in Afghanistan, and I guess you will shy away from specifics about it, the candidates, but the Obama candidacy are advocating an increase in troops in Afghanistan, as I understand it. There were revelations, an evaluation, an assessment by the British ambassador, I believe, was leaked. A memorandum prepared by a French diplomat was leaked, where the assessment was that it was a lost cause, that it would be a mistake to think that sending more troops is an answer. That's an assessment that has been made by a number of other people who aren't as close to it on the NATO side. So what is your view of whether more troops is an answer in Afghanistan? And secondly, broader question, but one that continues to be and is becoming of increasing importance, I think, which is the issue of the weaponization of space.
Afghanistan needs more help. It needs better cooperation, better coordination, and a willingness to do the things that people have said they're there to do. And I'll just make one comment to elaborate on that latter point. We have many folks from many countries who have sent troops to Afghanistan. The things that they are willing to do on their own or in support of their allies are widely varied. And certainly when I was commander over there, and I got a chance to see firsthand the so-called caveats that most countries in our alliance have their troops operating under, it was pretty discouraging. And I know that was the case for our commander who was in charge of the NATO forces. If all the folks there were willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done in an appropriate, coordinated manner, we'd be, I think, a lot better off. We need some more people. What they do is most important. I think we don't need a large number of additional people to go out and hunt down so-called Taliban and others in the country. The biggest need when I left the scene was for a significant number of really good troops to do training to get the Afghan security forces up to snuff so that they can take the lead here and to take care of their own country. And I think that the growing capability of that force is going to be appropriate to the task, but they're very small. It's and frankly, one of the thrusts that I pushed when I had responsibility was to try to do this in a very orderly manner. There were some calls to vastly increase the size of the Afghan army. Noble idea, but frankly very difficult to do, and I didn't want it done in a helter-skelter fashion. So it's methodically coming along and it's growing. But we need a lot of people to help. And the best examples that we can put out in the field are our most highly skilled combat troops, because they know how to act in these circumstances. But this is another insurgency, and it's different than Iraq in many respects. Certainly there's some commonalities. But the general approach here is to not, I believe, saturate the country with a large force. I don't think that's really too many people's idea of goodness, but to target our capabilities to, first and foremost, provide stability in those areas that are troubled right now, but to get the training accomplished so that the Afghan forces can do it. Space is an interesting challenge. You have a growing number of countries that are demonstrating a capability to get into space and operate there. The last thing we need is another arms race of sorts in space. I think we have to be careful to recognize that there are many vulnerabilities that we have built into our own systems. As we take advantage of some technologies, you leave yourself open to others. But just as we, I think, need to have a serious dialogue about nuclear weapons, and I was actually in China last week, engaged in a discussion with some counterparts on just that subject. I think we need to have a similar dialogue about space and what we might use space for in the future, and not to project some kind of a Cold War arms race there, but to figure out how we can actually use this medium for the benefit of people. Sir?
Reviewing the comments, I'm trying to tie threads together. In thinking about the comments you made this afternoon, a couple of things coalesced in my mind. I'm curious about, for example, your allusion to what I interpreted to be ineffectivity of the privatization of the military. I'm not sure that's what you meant, but it's
Privatization?
The subcontracting of many functions of the traditional military establishment in, for example, prosecution of...
Okay, let me correct that right now. What I was alluding to there is the idea that we as a nation can outsource the security of this country to a handful of people, and everybody else just kind of says, not my problem. We'll find some of these guys that are willing to go ahead and go fight our wars for us, or spend, as they do most of the time, out there defending the freedoms and being on alert so that we don't have surprises and things like that. That's what I was talking to. Not
precisely.
Not the contractor stuff.
I think I had it right. So
okay.
Using that as a reference, and also your repeated expression of interest in sort of citizen statesman interaction with their government and their common weal.
Yep.
And, of course, the financial implications of the outsourcing and, frankly, people not paying very much attention to what their government is doing and contributing to that, instead looking for things like tax cuts and other sort of self-centered issues. Would you be in support of, or what are your thoughts about, for example, a mandatory service requirement for all youth, maybe from 18 to 35 or something like that, not necessarily in the military, but as a way to lubricate the wheel of social engagement?
Okay. Frankly, I'd love it. I'd love it for the country as a whole to decide that something like this, you figure out the details of it, is in the best interests of the nation and its people, and get on with life, and not just, I'm going to make my money here, I'm going to go do this, I'm going to do my thing. I mean, we're in this together, and increasingly, it's the world. It isn't just this country. I mean, we just, again, you drop a stone in a pond and see what happens. So how do we get something like that? I mean, there have been proposals. A number of people have started, but nothing seems to be taken seriously. And, what's it take to get people to wake up and realize that the potential to do, somebody asks, well, what are you going to cut back on? Heck, we have the resources to do 100 times more than we're doing in almost anything you'd pick here if we really decided to reprioritize a few other things. It's the old business of, well, what is one vote or what is one action? Seemingly very little, but in my business over the years, I've seen individual decisions, actions on the part of one person that made phenomenal differences for hundreds and thousands of other people and others. So I'm on a high horse, sorry. Go ahead.
No, this ties to the other question. One other question about people would, if you allow me, the throwaway people such as yourself have, people who run large organizations in the military or other functions, private or government, have to share their wisdom, their acquired knowledge about how things might be changed. It seems to me that there are a lot of people, probably in this room and elsewhere, very interested in making use of your expertise without politicizing it. Now, having been on one side of that coin and now on the other, can you imagine a way that a new president might be able to elicit response from that huge core of people, public servants, that might turn the
Sure.
the population's view of what public service is about, including their own.
Yeah. There are examples, and there have been through history. There are a number of people in my visiting time back to Washington, serving on a committee that was requested and appointed by the Congress to look at the issue of our strategic posture. And that's, first of all, nuclear weapons and how we use them, should we use them, what's the deterrent value, all these kind of things. It's a bipartisan group of folk from all over the country. I'm one of the younger guys. I have to use the term graybeards carefully these days. But everybody's a volunteer, and there's some tremendous experience and brain power that's being brought to bear. That's just one little bit, though. I think that we could motivate lots of people. There are certainly many of my colleagues that are anxious to help. They're frustrated. They'd like to pitch in, and they do a lot of individual things, but that's one of the major roles, I think, of government and leadership, is to harness this thing, to put an umbrella, a framework around this thing and pull things in. So we put our minds to it. You can figure things out. I mean, I think traditionally people tend to pick an issue, a hot button item, and go throw the resources at that or try to get resources to fix it. But what I have in mind is something that's more fundamental. You know, maybe if you ingrain a behavior from an early age that everybody does. I mean, I've watched, just since I've been up here, I've seen young people doing all kinds of things in the community and for the country. But how do you spread that? How do you get people across the board to take this up and say, you know, this is something that we ought to be doing? There's no magic here. It takes a little bit of work. It takes more than a little bit of work, but I think you have to frame an idea, sell it to the majority of people. Instead of selling a tax cut, maybe, or some other Benny, why don't we sell this idea? Maybe it doesn't have the cachet of a couple of bucks in your pocket, but certainly more important, I think. Let me go back somewhere up in this. I haven't done anything in the corner. I can't see. Go ahead.
I've been quite somewhat mystified by the debate and the polarity about whether the President of the United States should meet with certain leaders with or without preconditions.
Yeah.
I understand the need to prepare, and there are certain protocols that need to, that makes sense. But maybe I'm missing something. What are these preconditions? Perhaps you might understand it better than I do.
Okay, I don't know, but here's my cut on this one. This stuff gets couched in political terms, as many other things do. My experience tells me that you need to get something done in the world. You can take a very high risk and very, these days, low probability of success by the coercion method. You're going to do this or else. Or you can figure out a way to end up getting people to get on board. Now, you got to have some measure of reality here. There are some bad actors in the world. And there are people who would absolutely rejoice at the sight of this country collapsing or the things that we stand for disappearing. There are a lot of other people, the majority, I believe, out there that are just looking to do the basic things and provide for the basic things. Again, we have a very, I believe, distorted, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, very different view of the world in this country, in this city, than the vast majority of citizens in this world, based on the amount of personal wealth, the opportunities available, the political system we have, it goes on and on. We're in a different world than the majority of people that inhabit this planet. But that said, you got to figure out what the background is. Before you go into some discussion, for example, I think you're alluding to Iran. We've had a couple of discussions with the Iranians. They have not been particularly fruitful. What items on the table, what issues for discussion, what ground rules and so forth. These things change all the time. There's a world politic and political process that goes on just as a domestic process goes on in this country, and people game it and play it and so forth. we have any number of issues that I think need to get discussed and resolved. There's no guarantee that sitting and talking to somebody is going to resolve them. We've been challenged by the DPRK for quite a few years. Made a little progress in the last couple of years, and that's really good. None of this goes like this, just as most of it doesn't go. Sometimes it does. You know, you have a bumpy road, and you got to take them and deal with them and go back in and keep working at it. So I think that the way to approach these things is to you face an issue, you see where you'd like to go, and you try to figure out a way to get people to work together to get there. And sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you got to wait. So there's no magic here. And I think the rhetoric of political positions often undermines the opportunity sometimes to be successful. Go ahead. Somebody stand up. Just go. And I'll get you next.
Okay.
Shoot.
I'm Wahidullah Azizi from Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here for the last 5 months. In Afghanistan, currently we have 53,000 troops from 43 countries, the international community troops. We have 75,000 Afghan National Army. We have 70,000 plus national police. And it's 7 years that they're trying to bring security there. But so far, there is a failure for all the international community. So considering your experiences, would the international community be able to bring security in Afghanistan? And if yes, how many years more is required to bring peace there? And actually, who supports the position, who fights against the government of Afghanistan, the Taliban and whoever they are? Every day we have more suicide bombings, we have robberies, we have attacks on the national army and the people. So the situation is getting worse and worse. The second question I have...
That's a pretty long question. So
yeah.
Why don't you let me take that one and give somebody else a chance. Okay?
Okay.
So first of all, if I could predict the future, I'd be pretty wealthy, and then I could take some of those resources and put them somewhere where we could get some good out of them. First of all, I would dispute some of your numbers, but I don't want to get into all the details of it. And to have an impression that if you totaled all these people, that they've all been working for 7 years straight here to achieve the common objective is an incorrect assessment. That isn't the reality of what's going on. I think you've got, in truth, the international community with some number of people, not insignificant, working generally, at least alleged to be working for the same objectives for about 2.5 years, and some challenges for a whole host of reasons. What do I think? I think it's quite possible to improve stability and security. And I think that if you do a complete, honest assessment of where the situation is, you'll see some things that are significantly improved. Like, for example, the number of children that are actually in schools today as compared to, you pick it, 5 years ago or 7, any time during the Taliban era. Look at the economic activity and, more importantly, the potential as the road system has been improved. I have been saying for as long as I've been closely engaged in this issue that the things that Afghanistan needs most are electric power, roads, water management, and revitalization of agriculture. You can't do that unless you have a general stability and security. And so the trick is to get enough security and stability to get moving on these other projects, which are going to be the thing that will, I believe, turn the place around. Is it possible? Of course. There have been other priorities in addition to Afghanistan. I think that the way things are shaping up now, you're probably going to see more effort in this area, and I think that's going to be to the benefit of the people of Afghanistan. But the people there have to play a role as well, as you well know. And one of the biggest challenges is, in addition to something that can't be solved overnight, the general illiteracy of the population, which is in the 60-some% range, and the traditional cultural challenges of people preferring to not have a central government and to do things in their traditional fractured ways. And I say that not in a derogatory term, it's just the way it is. They like things in the village and their valleys, and they don't particularly appreciate somebody telling them from Kabul or anyplace else what to do. So the country's going to have to grow. People are going to have to grow. Just like in Iraq, we've seen a significant maturing, if you would, of not just political process, but of a reality in people that, hey, the end of the day, the people there are the ones that really have to pick up and shoulder the burden and get moving. So I think it'll go. Ma'am?
Thanks. There is a region in which USA seems to lose interest, and this is Latin America. Instead of a country like Colombia is receiving the third big military aid in the world, and it seems that the policy against drugs is not working there. So I want to ask you, what do you think the next administration have to do refer to this fight against drugs? This is something that has to be readdressed, and how, and also because Afghanistan also it's a country that produces drugs too.
So the question is drugs, and what should we be doing, and is this next administration going to get some program going to address the drug issue? This gets back to my number one point. What do you think fuels the drug trade in Colombia or Afghanistan? Colombians? Afghanistan? Afghanis? Where are the drugs going? So what's the most appropriate way to stop the damage that's being caused to peoples in these countries? By sending armies to those countries to deal with it? Or wouldn't it be a little more efficient if we changed it at a different place? Seems like a no-brainer, but it's difficult to get those behaviors. Get you next. Go ahead.
What does victory in the war on terror mean, and how is it achievable?
Well, that's a kind of a flippant question, and I'll give you a flippant answer. Who knows? But let's get serious. Terror is a reality. This isn't some joke or some thing that political issue that is used to polarize the country. There are real people that use the terrorist means to kill people and inflict harm, and more importantly, what they're trying to do is put fear in people's minds to make them, to destabilize them, to destabilize society, and make people feel insecure and therefore vulnerable to whatever their particular agenda is. And it's pretty frightening to people. And frankly, look around the world at what's been perpetrated by terrorist actions just in the last 10 years. It's pretty sickening. So can we wave a wand? Are we going to have some single action or some person that's suddenly going to magically rise up and all terrorists are going to fall away? No, of course not. This is pretty insidious, and it's pretty tough to get rid of. These are behaviors, and these are behaviors that people perpetrate because they found them to be effective. And if people think that they can achieve their objective by terrorizing other people, they're likely to continue to do it. What will get them to change their minds? A number of things, it seems to me. Not one thing, very unlikely, but a number of things. One is people, generally, the populations of the world, say, we don't like this, we abhor this behavior, we're not going to put up with it, we're going to do whatever we can to get rid of it. And the most useful thing people can do is exchange information, because a lot of folks actually know a lot. It's just like any neighborhood. Ask any cop or any neighborhood warden or any political leader in a neighborhood. They know what's going on in a neighborhood. They can identify the good guys and the bad guys and the troublemakers. Now, are you willing to share that information? What are the political constraints? And you have this laundry list of problems. So getting people to generally agree that we got a problem and we don't like it, we want to do something about it. Having the means to actually interdict these problems. More importantly, I think, is to get into the heads of the likely recruits. This doesn't happen by magic. It's not one of these automatic things again. People make decisions to join groups that continue to perpetrate this kind of stuff. So you got to work against that. And it seems to me you work the conditions. You make it unpopular to do this. as opposed to the way some of this stuff is glorified in some circles today. I mean, to think that you would celebrate somebody who commits mass murder is, to me, pretty abhorrent. Maybe it's just me. But we have a lot of people in the world that seem to think this is okay, as long as it's these guys, all the people on this side of the audience. I didn't really like them. I don't like red jackets. I go to Dartmouth. This is human behaviors. We got to come at this, I think, from a number of ways. It's not going to go away overnight. And it requires coordinated action. It requires, I think, basically fundamental. And I think there's not a real problem with most people in the world that would generally agree on a set of behaviors that are not very helpful and are really very detrimental to other people. Now, to get some of the others that seem to just sit back and ignore this, and again, don't want to do it here, but that's okay over there, or I'm not going to get involved there. This is behavioral change, and we got to work on it. It takes not just political leadership to do it. It takes sometimes addressing others. I mean, other people will act, and they give you any excuse in the world as a rationale for actions, right? Is this aberrant behavior? It's the way, I mean, think about it. People are people. Nothing new here. You can go back and look at the classics, the earliest, the historians in the audience. You know this. You can find these behaviors. Anyway, sorry, high horse, but it's not an easy answer. And for people to put it up as a, this has all been, war on terror, that's a bunch of BS. We could have been diverting. Hey, these clowns that perpetrated 9/11 were serious. I was in the Pentagon. I felt the thud of that airplane blowing up under my feet. 42 of my people died that day. People I knew every day, people that I'd been with a half hour before that. This is real. And you ask people that were in Madrid or in London or in New York or any other place, and, serious. All right, shoot.
Sir, I was wondering if I could just, go back to the one question earlier about the cleanup that we have to do within our own country. Mm-hmm. And sir, I was wondering just, what do you believe are the strategies that we as in America, or just individuals, that we can do to change the hearts and minds of people within our country to turn away from their materialistic mindset and to be able to gain credibility of other people in the world?
Yeah, very basic. Starts with the family. Starts right at home. What are the values? What do you prize? What do the parents teach the kids? Again, it's this idea of outsourcing. Works well for some companies. It worked well for me, and I'm technically handicapped. Okay, give me a computer, and I'm in trouble. I should tell you an anecdote. My staff gave me some years ago a box painted red. Some of you are familiar with the old firebox. Break the glass and hit the hammer on the button. And there was a mouse hanging off the side of it, and a bunch of keyboards, and it said break glass in case of the usual operator error, which but we have a tendency to want to outsource everything. We want to outsource the values and judgments and principles that we say would like our kids to have. Teachers will take care of that. Then we rant and rave or rail at the teachers for how come our kids haven't gotten what the heck over. So it's out there. Look at go to any church in this nation. I don't care what the faith is. And go look at the principles by which the churches operate, and you'll find an awful lot of common ground. That's why in my experience in the world, I don't care what the color is, what the language is, what the religion is, the vast majority of people want the same things, have the same basic values. Shocking. And frankly, there's a speaker I'd like to get up here, an acquaintance of mine. It's down at another institution down the road, about 100 miles. He's done a lot of research, and he will guaranteed demonstrate the fact that 99, 44, 100% of each one of us is exactly the same. But anyway, it starts at home, and goes from there. So we talk the talk, but we're not walking the talk. It's that simple. Shoot.
I have a follow-on to that. You talked about individuals. What about institutions like MIT? What responsibility do they have since we organize, individuals organize at the group level?
Well, this goes from one end of society to the other. There's a responsibility for leaders. I think there's a greater responsibility the higher up in the food chain you are. Because the theory here being that you have learned more, you probably have more access to resources, more experience, and more ability to pull things together. And so the higher you are, the more is expected, just like the biblical comment. So the institution operates under a set of rules and principles. What are they? Do they encourage the kinds of behaviors that are appropriate to where we think we'd like to go? And again, this isn't one person. You got to sit down and do this in a group, and getting everybody to agree on everything is impossible. But I think you can get the majority of people to go in the right direction. So, national leadership, international leadership. UN is a great example of pulling together peoples from all over the world. Wonderful. Is it effective? Absolutely not. In most respects. Phenomenal potential. We would love to have the credibility of that institution if it acted in the way that could be helpful. But anyway, side thing. But you got to do it at every level. Everybody's got a responsibility. It's a little different, but if the operating principles are generally the same, I think you do all right. Ma'am, you had a question?
I was just wondering about the fact that we're going to see a pretty immediate reduction in ground troops in both Iraq and Afghanistan as those respective countries take over control. Mm-hmm. But what about airspace coordination and aviation operations? Because as a former company commander in Iraq and 25th Aviation Brigade, we've experienced back-to-back deployments for Army helicopter pilots. And I'm just curious what the plan is, or if there is one, or how immediate we'll actually see the results of specialty skills soldiers and aviation operations coming out and reducing, and Iraq and Afghanistan taking over.
Okay, that's a very technical, specific question. Just so everybody understands, this young lady is referring to the reality that in Iraq and Afghanistan, they don't have a lot of the technical capabilities that we brought to the country. And so as the majority of the combat activities have stopped, and we withdraw those combat soldiers and Marines, there's still going to be a lot of other functions need doing. And the answer to that is I think there'll be a lot less than there certainly were a year ago in terms of numbers required, but there's still going to be a reason to be able to shoulder some of, or a need to shoulder some of these things until these air forces in this case can be brought up the line. The Iraqi air arm is very immature and going to be a while. The Afghans, a little bit different. Numbers may not be great, but they're hard at it and they're doing amazing things. They have a handful of helicopters and transports, and they're flying the wings off the things. They're doing all the things that you would like them to do, and they're just champing at the bit to try to do more. They're going to need some technical help. I think the overall numbers are not going to be nearly as great as they were certainly a year ago, but we're still going to end up with more of your type of folk there to do that, because frankly you have unique skill sets that very few others don't have. And that's one way to help them as they mature, I think, is to provide those capabilities that they just don't have. So going to be a few more of those. Somebody up here. Okay, sure.
Admiral, going back to the earlier part of your talk, I
Yeah.
wonder if you could reflect on the future of naval aviation given the advances in unmanned vehicles and anti-ship missile technology.
Okay, specific technical question, but naval aviation, kind of close to my heart. Increasingly, I believe that we'll see unmanned vehicles pick up more roles, and I think that's okay. But we still, it's going to be years before many of the functions are going to be just given away to technology, and it will become critically important, more important to figure out how to effectively employ this kind of stuff and to see how it's to really get the benefit. We have some things that the technology gives us that are just wouldn't have been imagined some years ago, and other things that haven't seemed to change a whole lot. And so there's still going to be a need for people for at least as long as you and I are around the earth. Okay? Hey, listen, it's been a real treat to be with you. Judging from the number of hands, we probably could have kept this up for some period of time. It's too late now. If you want to do it again or get in another forum, we can figure something out while I'm up here. It's real treat. I want to say it's an honor and a terrific pleasure, personal pleasure, to be here at MIT, to feel the energy, to get to meet so many people, students, faculty, staff, and my sense is overwhelming majority of people really want to do things, get it done right, help this country, help people, and to move us down a road in a very positive way. And I think that's really refreshing, and I encourage you, and keep reaching out. One of the things I learned over many years was when I thought I was overtasked, I never was. My wife wouldn't say that. But in reality, we can do so much more. We got phenomenal things up here between our ears, and just keep using them. Great to be with you. Thanks very much. Dick, thank you.
Thank you all very much for coming, and I hope we'll take him up on his offer to get him back to continue the conversation. Thank you.